They say monsters are born from legends. But once, there was a man who became one in the 15th century. Among the misty mountains of Wallachia, now part of modern-day Romania, a name was whispered with more fear than the devil himself. Vlad III of Wallachia. To his enemies, he was Tepes, the imp. To his people, both savior and curse. The child of blood and chains. Vlad was not born into peace. He was born into treachery. His father, Vlad II, Dracul, was a nobleman, a warrior of the Order of the Dragon, sworn to defend Christianity against the Ottomans. But his loyalties were as shifting as the Carpathian winds. When Vlad was just a boy, he and his younger brother Radu were taken as hostages by the Ottoman Empire, a political move to ensure their father's obedience. The young Vlad grew up in captivity. The gilded walls of the Sultan's palace in Idorn could not hide the smell of fear. He saw executions, impalements, tortures, lessons the Ottomans used to teach submission. But where others learned fear, Vlad learned power. He learned that fear was not weakness. It was a weapon. While his brother Radu grew soft under the Sultan's comfort, adopting Turkish manners, Turkish speech, Turkish loyalties, Vlad's hatred sharpened like a blade. He swore that one day he would return to Wallachia, and he would never bow again. The return of the dragons. Some years passed. The Ottoman court thought of Vlad as forgotten, just another prince in their control. But when his father, Vlad II, was betrayed and murdered by Wallach and Bojars, and his elder brother buried alive, Vlad's fury ignited. With the help of Hungarian forces, he returned to his homeland. Wallachia was burning, a kingdom ruled by greed and cowardice. The nobles who had once served his father were now drunk with power, switching sides between Turks and Hungarians for profit. The peasants starved while foreign armies crossed their lands at will. Vlad returned not as a savior, but as a storm. His first act was not mercy, it was vengeance. He gathered the boyars, those treacherous lords who had betrayed his blood, and invited them to a feast in his royal hall. The torches flickered as they toasted to peace. But when the music stopped, soldiers sealed the doors. Vlad stood before them, silent, cold, unblinking. Then he spoke, voice low as thunder, before the strike. You killed my father. You buried my brother alive. Now, you will join them in the earth. That night, hundreds of nobles were impaled, the air filled with screams and the smell of burning pitch. Some say he watched the stakes rise as he dined calmly, as though attending a ceremony. The next morning, the sun rose over a forest of Bodhis, their silhouettes swaying gently in the dawn breeze. Wallachia had a new ruler, and his rule was carved in fear. The reign of Terra Vlad believed peace could never be bought, it must be forced. His methods were brutal, but his purpose was absolute, to cleanse Wallachia from corruption and cowardice. Thieves, traitors, liars, all were punished the same way, impalement. He ruled not through love, but through terror. Yet strangely, under his reign, the land began to stabilize. Crime vanished. Merchants traveled safely. Villages prospered again, but no one dared to disobey. A story spread that once, a golden cup was left in the center of a public fountain in anyone could drink from it, but none dared to steal it. Such was the fear of Vlad Tepes. Even his punishments became legends. He once ordered that all beggars and the poor be gathered into a grand hall for a feast. When they had eaten and drunk their fill, he locked the doors and set the building ablaze. His reasoning was simple: I rid the land of useless mouths. Was he mad, or was he a ruler who understood the only language his people respected? Terror. The shadow of the crescent, but peace could not last. The Ottoman Empire, vast and hungry, soon demanded tribute, gold, slaves, loyalty. Vlad refused. When Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, sent envoys demanding submission, Vlad invited them to his court. The ambassadors entered proudly, their turbans high. When they refused to remove them before him, citing Ottoman custom, Vlad smiled. "If you wish to keep your hats on," he said, "then you shall never take them off again." He ordered his guards to nail the turbans to their skulls. The envoy's screams echoed through the stone halls as blood trickled down their faces. Word of the impalers. Madness spread quickly, from Transylvania to Istanbul, but Vlad didn't care. He was no longer fighting for allies or treaties. He was fighting for legacy. The night attack. It was the year 1462. The Ottomans, enraged by his defiance, sent a massive army to crush him, led by none other than Sultan Mehmed II himself. The conqueror of Constantinople marched upon Wallachia with over 100,000 men. Vlad's army was small, barely 30,000. But what he lacked in numbers, he made up for in terror. He burned his own villages, poisoned wells, and left nothing for the invaders but ashes and corpses. It was a scorched earth nightmare. One night, under the cover of darkness, Vlad struck back. With a small band of soldiers dressed in Ottoman uniforms, he infiltrated the enemy camp. Their goal was madness itself, to assassinate the Sultan. The night was chaos. The moon hid behind clouds as screams tore through the camp. Tents burned, horses panicked, men turned on each other in confusion. Vlad's forces killed thousands before vanishing into the forest, leaving behind only flames and corpses. The Sultan barely escaped with his life. It became known as the night attack, one of the most terrifying ambushes in medieval history. The forest of the impaled. When the Sultan's army advanced again, they met something even worse. His Mehmed and his generals approached the capital of Targovekt. The smell hit them first, thick, rotting, unbearable. Then they saw it, a field of death, stretching for miles. Over 20,000 Ottoman prisoners, soldiers, and traitors, all impaled on wooden stakes, their bodies rotting in the summer sun. Crows feasted on their eyes. Wolves prowled among the corpses. Some bodies still twitched half alive, impaled through the chest or abdomen, left to die slowly. The Sultan's army froze. Even Mehmed himself, the man who had conquered Constantinople, was struck with horror. He ordered the army to halt. Before him stood not a man, but a nightmare carved into history. Vlad had achieved what no army could. He made the conqueror turn back. The price of terror, but terror is a double-edged sword. The same fear that made his enemies tremble also made his own people despise him. The nobles he hadn't killed whispered rebellion. The peasants, once grateful for order, now prayed for mercy. Even his allies, the Hungarians, began to question if Vlad had become too dangerous to exist. Rumors spread of his cruelty, his madness, his thirst for blood. They said he dined among the impaled, dipping his bread in their blood, that he laughed as men screamed, that he impaled women, children, even animals. Some of it may have been lies, but some, perhaps, was true. By the time the Ottoman threat withdrew, Vlad's legend had already outgrown the man himself. He had become something far greater and far darker than a ruler. He was a symbol, a myth, a monster. To be continued. In the land of blood and smoke, Vlad's crown still glittered, but around him, shadows grew. Enemies gathered, alliances fractured, and betrayal crept closer each night. The man who ruled through fear was about to discover that fear obeys no master. His end would be as gruesome as his reign, and his legend would outlive him forever. The forest of the impaled still stood silent beneath the pale light of dawn. Thousands of bodies, motionless yet defiant, marked the boundary between life and legend. For weeks, no army dared to enter Wallachia. Even the winds whispered his name with caution. Vlad Tepes, the man who had made fear itself kneel. But the storm that would destroy him was not coming from without. It was rising from within. Whispers in the court inside the cold halls of Targovekt. The torches burned low. The once mighty court of Vlad III had grown hollow. The nobles who survived his purges bowed low when he entered, but their eyes spoke treachery. Rumors slithered like snakes through the corridors. Vlad has lost his mind. He drinks blood. He is cursed. And in a way, they were right. Vlad had begun to change. He rarely slept, and when he did, he woke drenched in sweat, haunted by visions of impaled bodies, whispering his name, of his father's ghost, staring silently at him through the flames. At night, he would walk alone through the fields of the dead. Sometimes he spoke to them, sometimes he smiled. The man who once controlled fear was now devoured by it. The betrayal word of his growing instability spread across the land. The Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, who had once supported him, began to see Vlad as a liability. The Ottomans, still licking their wounds, plotted revenge, and his own people, weary of terror, began to pray for a new ruler. The betrayal began with a letter, a forged one. It claimed Vlad had offered alliance to the Turks. Proof. The Hungarians said that he was no longer loyal to Christendom. Whether Matthias himself forged it or merely pretended to believe it, none can say, but the result was certain. When Vlad sought refuge in Transylvania, he was seized and imprisoned. The man who had impaled thousands now found himself locked behind iron bars, surrounded by stone and silence. The cage of shadows. Years passed. In the dungeon of Visegrad Castle, Vlad Tepes sat alone. The world outside forgot him, but he did not forget the world. They say he spent his time impaling rats on splinters of wood. Some say he prayed. Others say he laughed. He was neither mad nor sane, just something in between. From his narrow window, he watched the river Danube flow, endless, uncaring. He would whisper, "You carry their blood, don't you? All of them, still flowing." To his captors, he was both prisoner and curiosity. To the few who still believed in him, he was a sleeping dragon, waiting to rise again. And rise, he eventually did. The return after more than a decade in chains. The political winds shifted. The Ottomans once again threatened to overrun Eastern Europe, and the Hungarians, desperate for a strong man, decided to release their monster. Vlad was free, older, thinner, but not broken. The fire in his eyes burned as fierce as ever. He returned to Wallachia with a small army, reclaiming his throne in 1476. But the land he returned to was not the same. The people who once feared and obeyed him were gone. His enemies had multiplied, and his reputation, once his greatest weapon, now worked against him. He tried to rule again, to rebuild, to restore order, but the years in prison had turned his mind darker. He trusted no one. Even his own guards trembled under his gaze. The Ghost King, they say, that when Vlad rode through his villages, the peasants would bow so low their foreheads touched the mud. None dared meet his eyes. Children were told, "Behave, or Tepes will come for you." But there was no army left to enforce his rule. Only shadows, whispers, and his own restless wrath. Still, in his twisted way, he believed he was doing God's work. He rebuilt fortresses, executed thieves, and punished those who betrayed the country to the Turks. To him, cruelty was justice, order born from agony. In his private chambers, he would stare into a cracked mirror for hours. Some nights, he spoke to it. Other nights, he screamed at it. One servant once claimed that Vlad said, "Do you see him? The monster in the glass. He wears my face, but he is not me." The final battle. It was winter, 1476, when the final reckoning came. The Ottomans invaded again, joined by Wallachian traders who longed for his death. Vlad gathered what few loyal soldiers he still had, barely 1,000 men, and marched into the snow. They met near Bucharest, under gray skies, heavy with storm. The fields were frozen. The dead of past wars lay buried beneath the ice. It was as if the earth itself remembered his crimes. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Steel clashed on steel, Men screamed, fell, rose again. Vlad fought like a man possessed, his sword cutting through flesh as easily as air. Blood sprayed across his armor. Snow turned red beneath his feet. Witnesses said he laughed as he fought, the same chilling laugh that had once echoed over fields of impaled corpses. To his men, it was both terrifying and divine. Their king had become death itself. But in the end, death claimed him too. The death of the Impalarno, one knows for certain how Vlad died. Some say he was struck down by the Turks. Others claim it was his own men, mistaking him for an enemy in the chaos. A few whisper he was betrayed, stabbed in the back by a servant he trusted. Whatever the truth, when the battle ended, his body was found surrounded by the corpses of his enemies. A grotesque smile still frozen on his face. The Turks took his head, preserved it in honey, and sent it to Sultan Mehmed II in Istanbul. It was displayed on a spike for all to see, a grim trophy of vengeance. But the Sultan, it is said, stared at the head for a long time, then whispered, "Now the world is quieter and smaller." The legend that would not die his body was buried, perhaps at the Snagov monastery, perhaps nowhere at all. No grave was ever confirmed. Centuries later, when monks opened the supposed tomb of Vlad Tepes, they found nothing but animal bones. Some say he rose again, some say the earth refused to hold him. Over the years, his story twisted into myth. From prince to monster, from ruler to ghost. He became the seed of legends that would echo through centuries, inspiring tales of immortality, darkness, and blood. The name Dracula, meaning son of the dragon, would one day be spoken not in fear of the man, but in fascination with the myth. A myth that began not in Transylvania's castles, but in a forest of the impaled reflections in blood in the candlelit halls of history. Vlad's image flickers like a restless flame. Was he a hero who saved his homeland from the Ottoman tide, or a sadist who drowned his kingdom in horror? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between. He was a product of his age, an age where mercy was weakness and power was survival. He understood one truth better than anyone else. Fear lasts longer than love. And so, centuries later, when the night wind moves through the forests of Romania, people still whisper his name, not as a king, not as a man, but as a legend carved in blood and silence. Epilogue: the price of immortality. What became of Vlad Tepes after death is unknown, but his legacy endured, stronger than any empire. Empires fell, sultans died, kingdoms vanished, yet his story survived, whispered in monasteries, painted in horror, written in fear, because men forget mercy, but they never forget monsters. And so, even now, in the shadow of his mountains, when the moon is full and the forests sigh with the wind, some claim to see a lone rider, a pale man in black armor, his cloak flowing behind him, riding through mist toward an unseen army of the dead, a king without a crown, a ghost without peace, a monster without an end. Vlad Tepes, the man who turned fear into eternity.